Welcome to Carly Tackles, making your own office desk. This is a 3-part series. If you have not seen part 1, preparing the top, you may want to flip over to that video now because this is part 2, pouring the epoxy. Before we can start mixing up some fun epoxy, we need to make a form to hold our desk and allow the epoxy to pour in between the two pieces and prevent the epoxy from running out on the floor. We also need to use material that will allow the epoxy to separate from the form so we can return it back to the desk. The material I'm using is melamine. I cut out the bottom and now I'm cutting strips for the sides. I'm using my DeWalt construction table saw to make these cuts. If you do not have a table saw, you can also use a circular saw. I would recommend an edge guide to help you cut the straight lines. Instead of using a tape measure to measure my desk and then measure the sides for the form, I'm just placing the sides onto the desk and using relative measuring, which is lining it up to one end and drawing a line at the other where it meets, and then with a speed square I extend that line and I take it over to my 10-inch Bosch miter saw. Now I'm going to repeat this for both sides and the end pieces. This way, if my desk wasn't perfectly square, if I had one end longer than the other, by using relative measuring, I'm ensuring that I am truly matching my desk versus matching a measurement. To attach the side pieces to the bottom of the form, I'm going to cut pocket holes into each of the pieces that will allow me to fasten it easily to the bottom. I'm using the Craig pocket hole jig to accomplish this task. To help the desk and the epoxy release from the melamine, we are going to line the form with Tyvek tape. This has been used by Stone Coat countertops in many of their epoxy runs. The epoxy does not stick to the tape, so it will help you release it from your form. When you apply it, you want to make sure you're getting the whole form covered. Once I get this first strip on here, you're going to see me overlap my next strip. So you want to overlap a little bit of the tape you previously put down and then run it all the way through. You want to be pushing firmly against the tape and the melamine to make sure it's a good bond. We do not want any epoxy running between our layers of tape. Before I attach the side pieces to the form, I'm going to put Tyvek tape on them now. It's a lot easier to get right up in that edge when I don't have a corner to work with. I can get my fingers on both sides. So I do recommend before you attach your side pieces and your end pieces that you line them with Tyvek tape. Make sure you're paying attention to the pocket hole side. That's going to be on the outside. No need to put Tyvek tape on the pocket holes. Now that I have one strip of tape on my side pieces, I'm going to fasten one of the ends to the form. Now the bottom of the form is much wider and much longer than the desk itself, and I made sure it was wide enough to account for my side pieces, but I'm going to let the side pieces fit the desk to decide where they're placed versus measuring and hoping things are square. I don't need this desk to be perfectly square, and so I'm just going to make the form fit the desk. Once I have the end piece fastened securely, I can use the desk to slide against that, and then I can transition to one of my long end side pieces and we can just work my way around. Once you get all of your end pieces fastened, you can remove the desk and it's time to put down more Tyvek tape. We want to make sure we're covering our corners and where the sides meet the form. So you can do a corner there. I also grabbed like a plastic putty knife just to make sure, because you know my fingers are round, just to make sure I'm able to put that tape firmly into the corner, not let it be rounded, but to actually fit in the corner. So I did find this very useful to use a plastic putty knife to help me apply the tapes around the seams there. So something you may want to try. Now you can move your form to wherever you're going to pour the epoxy. I'm moving it to my basement because I have less dust and I can control temperatures and fans. When you set up, you want to use levels and shims to make sure your form is perfectly level. Epoxy will gravitate to the lowest point, so you check yourself with the level before you start pouring. Now let's talk epoxy. I'm using Stone Coat countertops. I watched a lot of their YouTube videos and they were very helpful. The first thing we're going to need is a casting resin. They have a great website and calculator to help you figure out how much. So this is the gap you're trying to fill. So if you're doing a river table, what's that internal dimensions? Or for me, it's that epoxy border and filling up my letters. So I guesstimate my length, my width, and my depth. And when you hit enter, it calculates how much of this casting resin you're gonna need. Also, the videos near the products are really beneficial. I probably have watched them all, because before this, I didn't know what to do with epoxy. The other thing is the quick coat. Now, I'm not using their quick coat in this video because they were sold out and I had to try another one. But that's your seal coat to prevent air bubbles coming out from your live pieces before you do your casting. And then this is your flood coat. So I used it in two ways. One, I used it as a seal coat, and then I used it as a flood coat to determine how much you need. Again, another calculator to really help you out. Now, when I was watching their videos on one of their river tables or live edge tables, they recommend doing 3 applications of 1 ounce for your seal coats. And you're going to sand and wipe and all that fun stuff in between every layer. And then for your flood coat, you would do 1 application of 3 ounces. They also have lots of fun color pigments. You'll see me use, I picked 3 different versions here, but you can buy fun colors. They got dyes. They got spray paints that they do fun things with. You can watch some of their videos and check it out. The other thing is I did buy a few tools from them. I couldn't find one of the brushes like they described in the stores or as affordable. Everywhere seemed more expensive. So I bought this kit. It comes with their trowel that has the grooves in it, and you'll see me use that on the flood coat, but the brushes were included, and it was a way better deal than buying them at Home Depot. So just wanted to call that out. Stone Coat Countertops website, great information. They got a great YouTube channel. So to recap, the products that we're going to use is a quick coat, we're going to use a casting, and then this epoxy kit is for seal coats and flood coat. Quick coats do the same thing that a seal coat does, only in less time. It allows you to apply epoxy sooner. And that's why you would apply a quick coat versus a seal coat if you had a need for speed here. This is what we are going to apply to the wood, the raw edges. Now, Stone Coat was out of their version, so I am trying another brand. A friend of mine did a lot of research in epoxy and really liked this one, so that's what made me give it a shot. And I must say, it worked really well. I can't compare it to Stone Coat's quick coat, but this product worked great. I didn't have any issues with it. And it seemed about the same consistency and quality as other epoxies that I had used from Stone Coat. So very good stuff. Tried it out. What we're going to do is we're going to mix this. I would tell you the proportions and how long to stir, but every epoxy is different. So read the instructions on your box or your bottle for the appropriate epoxies. And what I'm doing now is applying it to the inside edges. I kind of have, you'll notice the frame's up a little bit in the form because I want to make sure I kind of get around that bottom curve, because I want to make sure no air can escape that and ruin when we do the casting mold. So I'm applying this by hand. I watch the Stone Coat guys apply theirs by hand more times than anything else, and it seemed to work great. Obviously I'm wearing gloves, that was helpful, and I'm just trying to make sure I'm covering. And by using your hand too versus just pouring, you're able to move the epoxy around and reduce that surface tension that would prevent it from evenly spreading on your wood. For the top, I'm using a squeegee. This was also one of the tools I saw Stone Coat countertops using to help spread the epoxy around. After it works really well if you just had applied quick coat with your hands and then you go to grab the handle, you're gonna spread epoxy all over that. So I made a little bit of a mess, but I was able to clean it up later with some acetone. But it's a little messy if you do it in the exact order that I am. Make sure you're getting your corners pretty good with that seal coat. You don't want any air bubbles blowing up. Once you cover the whole thing, I decided I wanted to torch it first before moving on to my middle piece, and then this way I could get in on those sides and have a little bit more room. That heat's just moving it around, releasing any bubbles. Notice I'm not on top of it, I'm not lighting it on fire, I'm keeping kind of a distance here. I'm trying to move it quickly, but you're really just looking for that smooth finish that I'm showing you now. And if you're looking for any air bubbles, just kind of want that heat gun to remove it. If you don't have one of those butane torches, a heat gun also works well for this. You can use either one of those tools. I'm going to place my centerpiece back in, but I want to make sure it's evenly spaced from the border. So I had these blocks I had cut out to make that happen, or make it a lot easier for me. I'm also doing some that same quick coat epoxy, and I'm putting it on the surface. This is going to act kind of like a glue. Now remember, Tyvek tape should help it release, but I don't want that middle piece sliding around as I'm applying epoxy to it. So I kind of get it placed with my spacers, and I'm going to push firmly to kind of get it to stick in its place there. And then when I feel that I'm good and I covered it all, I'll remove the spacers. And I just be careful when I'm applying epoxy that I don't use too much force and shift it. And I never had any issues with it moving on me. Of course, I did play with these coasters first. I put a little quick coat in the sections that I rounded out for the coasters. I kind of spread it out there, made sure I covered it all, and I'm using that almost like a CA glue. And I'm placing the coasters in with that, and then I put a little bit over the coaster to make sure I have that sealed in. I have seen this done on a few other people's like river table videos or coffee tables. They'll put pennies. I saw someone do like bullet shells, gems, rocks, little pieces of decoration in their piece, and they're using this quick coat like a glue, but also a sealant in case it's porous and air would escape later. When you go to do your casting pour, that thicker pour, you don't want your objects to be releasing air through it, otherwise you'll have bubbles. I'm just emptying the contents of that cup onto the top, and then I'm going to grab my squeegee and spread it around. It did take me a while in the beginning to get used to using the squeegee to understand how much force to push down versus pull and allow through, but you do kind of get the hang of it quickly. And the main thing is just to spread the epoxy to get a nice clean coat. I did learn my lesson from the outside. Do the squeegee on top before doing the sides with your hands so you make less mess. So that's what you're seeing me do now, is apply to the side. When it came to the letters, we still need to make sure we're getting our epoxy in the letters and all the way down. So I first tried a brush. It didn't work the greatest, but my fingers did fit, and I just decided to do the entire thing with my fingers. I could feel the wood grain, I could feel if it was drier in some spots than others, and I could really get it in there. So the brush was a nice attempt. Fingers did better. I finished the quick coating the inside piece of the desk and reached for the butane torch to apply a little heat to release any air bubbles that I may have had. I did check on it a little bit later and went again with the butane torch. You don't want to do it too much. I think Stone Coat recommends like within 30 minutes of when you first apply it, you can come back and apply some heat. But you're really just looking for that nice thin epoxy layer to help coat the wood and make sure there's no areas where live wood is exposed. You can take a closer look at the coasters, how nice that epoxy kind of locked it in there. You can see the epoxy in the letters. The finger did way better than the brush, but you're just looking for that smooth, glossy finish to let you know. Now it's time for sanding. So this is 220 grit. What we're going to do is we're just going to sand the internal piece where we're going to pour the casting epoxy. We let it cure, and now we need to kind of sand the epoxy that we put down to create a mechanical bond. So we're doing just light sanding. We're not working about the top yet. That'll come later. We're just doing where we're going to pour epoxy. That also includes those letters, which was a pain in the butt to sand. And I'm trying to vacuum up as much of the sawdust as I can. I have the brush attachment on there, but I will also go through with a light acetone on a rag and just lightly brush to capture that sawdust from the epoxy dust I should say, and lift that away. And you kind of feel a little tackiness left behind after you do that. And that's great because we want that casting epoxy to attach itself to our quick coat. To answer the riddle, how do I know how much color, sparkles, epoxy to add to get me the look I'm going for before I pour it? You're going to need a cup and a Sharpie. You're going to stick your cup in there and you're going to draw a line to the height. This will give you an idea of how tall or how much volume will be in your mold section. And so once we get to that point, you'll watch me pour some of the epoxy in the cup, and that's how I'll determine if I have enough of my color pigment. So just wait, hold on to that thought there. This is casting epoxy. Notice my A and B's. They're messed up. A should be the one you pour more of. B is the one you pour less of. It's a 2-to-1 ratio. This is A. This is where I'm realizing, oh shoot, I just said B, but I meant A. And we're going to fill it up to the B line, even though it's A. And I do believe on one of the videos in Stone Coat Epoxy, they do recommend you pour A first because B is a hardener and it's heavier and it will help sink, so it helps you stir it if you pour B onto A versus the other way around. So now I'm pouring the hardener. One thing they recommended when you stir your casting is not to use a power drill, which you'll see me use in other cases, but to use a stick by hand. This is supposed to reduce the amount of bubbles we are adding to the epoxy with our stirring. By the way, read the bottles. You're going to be stirring for a long period of time. I think it's 6 to 8 minutes. Set a timer, alternate your hands, flex your fingers, because you stir for a while there. Now we're going to add some coloring. So I use Diamond Dust. I think that's one of their popular sellers. I also am using a blue pearl, and that probably gave it its best coloring, and I kind of was looking for like opaque. I wanted light to shine through it, but I didn't want to see the lights underneath it. And I think that's where this blue pearl really helped me out. And then they have glitter additives. You know, I was thinking light reflect off the silver specks could have a lot of fun too. So I have 3 things: diamond dust, blue pearl, and glitter additives. I couldn't quite tell in that big container if I had enough of the swirls. So I poured it in a little cup just to get an idea. And I was like, it looks really transparent yet. So I put in some more blue pearl in there, stirred it up. And when I thought, okay, this looks like a good test, now brings in the cup that we drew the line on. I'm pouring it to the line. So this is giving me an idea of how much epoxy is going to be in one spot of that pour. It'll let me know, is it too translucent? Is it too solid and light doesn't shine through? You can still see with my flashlight that light shines through, but you can't see the flashlight. That's key. So that's how I determined what I needed. Now for my first layer, I didn't add too much of the blue pearl. So you can do this in layers and kind of swirl it together later. So this is more translucent. Notice you can really see the Tyvek font. I'm trying as carefully as I can just to pour between the 2 boards. You'll see me in some spots wipe it with a cloth if I accidentally dribble on the surface. When it came time to pour in the letters, I switched to a smaller cup, a lot easier to control than a bigger bucket. So if you're doing a project then you have a little bit little spaces or anything that's a little bit more challenging, I would switch over to a little cup. Gives you a little bit more control. Now one of the things I noticed as I was pouring in these letters is, you know, we try to push and seal that inner piece down to the Tyvek tape, but you're going to watch the levels of your epoxy lower in this first one. So I just kind of kept an eye. I would pour other places, but I'll go back and pour more, and then I let it cure in between the mini layers that we did, and I went back through and put a final layer. I wanted to kind of have it bubble. You know, when you pour something to a certain point, it doesn't break that surface tension, it kind of bubbles. That's what I ended up going for on the letters, that bubble before it flooded the wood. And that way I knew I had it tall enough. I could always fill it later with a seal coat, but I was really looking to fill it with this fun casting epoxy. Again, we want to apply heat torch here to rule out bubbles. They recommend every certain amount of inches that you apply a little heat in between your pores to allow bubbles to escape before you add more layers. And you can see I spilled a little bit, but just having that cloth in my hand really helped wipe most of it up. And I'm trying my best. I also took a little of this and poured it where I had those coasters to add a little sparkle to my golden girls, but not too much that you couldn't see them. Be careful not to overdo sparkles if you want to be able to see through it. And after a good pour, apply a little bit more heat. It's kind of fun watching the epoxy move under the heat. This cup, I added a little bit more blue pearl to it. And you can do fun things as you let it sit. You can go back through before it fully cures and swirl and add patterns. If you do it too soon, it may lose some of your movement that you're trying to do. So you might want to go back and check it every so often and swirl it. But there is a certain point where you do not want to keep touching your epoxy. check out that movement. You can see the swirls. That blue pearl gives it that bluish hint. It's pretty opaque. You can't see the words Tyvek underneath the tape anymore. My letters look a little bit bluer than others, which is good because I had a little trouble with the router. But just look at what those colors did. Here's my light glitter on my Golden Girls. I got heat for the basement floor and a light fan blowing on top to help move the heat away from the epoxy. Once you're done, once you give it its curing time, you can remove the desk from your form. And this is why you use pocket hole screws so you can easily access them. And I did put some blue paint tape around the borders, you probably noticed, to help keep anything that may have got under out. And so I'm just slicing all of my areas where I had tape, trying to make it as easy on me as possible to separate the form. I will admit, it took a little bit of muscles to be able to get it down, but I was also really nervous I was going to break my desk. So I was being pretty careful here. If you notice, there's really nothing attached to that tape. It did a great job. After I got that first piece removed, I was feeling a little bit more confident. Took out all the screws and made slices in the tape. I also grabbed a few metal putty knives to help me lift and separate in spots. Just worked my way around slowly. You can watch me try to break a few things here. This was the part I was so nervous about. Was the outside and inside pieces of the desk going to be one piece? Was the epoxy just going to fall through and stay behind? You know, where was it going to separate? I very carefully loosened it up all the way around, put some shims under the desk, and just slowly lifted, and it came out one solid piece. You can see where I had some epoxy go under the desk, where that believe, like I was telling you, the letters seem to always lose epoxy somehow, and that's what you're seeing there. But it separated from the Tyvek tape, it stuck to the board, and it was one solid piece. Here's where I do my test. Can you see my hand? No? Can you see my light? Yes. And that's perfect, because we don't want our lights to be seen, but we do want the lights to shine through it. I carried the desk back out to the garage. Didn't want the sanding to be in my epoxy area. And I put on the toughest grit I had on my orbital sander and tried to give it a few passes to see what I can knock down. I quickly gave up on the orbital sander. Didn't quite have what I needed. So I stepped up my game with the belt sander. I believe I have 40 grit, and that did so much better. And this is the bottom side, remind you, not the top. I would not have done that to the top. This is just to knock off all of that bleed through on the back so I could have a smooth surface. Now it's time for the top. I got my sandpaper on there on my orbital sander. And if you do not like sanding, do not do this project. It is a lot of sanding. You're going to watch me repeat the same things over and over again. You sand, you vacuum, you wipe with a cloth, you get some acetone and you put that on the cloth, and then you wipe on that to pick up the epoxy dust. You're going to do this so many times. This was just to get the casting. We are going to prepare this for the seal coat. The seal coat again is 3 applications of 1 ounce epoxy. We need to double check, make sure our platform is level. This time we're not going to have sides. We're going to have it flow over the sides. This is the seal coat or flood coat epoxy. This is not a 2-to-1 ratio. This is a 1-to-1 ratio. And I believe they have a calculator on there to help you determine how much you need to mix to get 1 ounce of coverage of this epoxy. So we pour this on there, and we are going to spread this around with our favorite squeegee. And notice there's no sides. We're going to carry this around. I start in the middle to kind of get used to the squeegee again. And we're going to have it even go over our edges. This is one of the reasons when we prepared the top, we added a round over to that outer piece of the desk to allow the epoxy to roll over, because we want them to coat the sides. If you're curious what my desk is resting on, besides a lot of plastic and I have tarps all over the floor, Rockler's bench cookies, I have them scattered underneath this, and it's supporting it. This will allow the epoxy to cup the desk and actually go under it before dripping. After you have your seal coat applied, again we're going to do the heat torch. So you're going to watch these steps. Apply your seal coat with a squeegee, grab a butane or a heat gun and provide heat. Let it cure. Typically I did this every night. Then you're going to carry it back up to your garage and you're going to remove these little nubbins. The thing that worked great for me is a multi-purpose tool with a little cutter on it. And I just went right through those nubbins. I switch out the head for a sandpaper head, and I sand these dots. Now every seal coat we do, you're going to have these. I took care of them every coat. I was nervous that I left them for the end. They'd be too hard and cured and you have multiple layers that I wouldn't be able to get them off. So I addressed these every single time. I also grab my vacuum and brush attachment and try to clean up as much of that epoxy debris as I can. Now it's time to try to flip this over. The epoxy takes 7 days to cure and 30 days to fully harden. It's only been 1 day. So you might want a moving blanket, a blanket, something soft. You don't want to put scratches in your top. We are going to sand with 3 different grids of sandpaper. I start out at 80, 120, 220. Between every grit of sandpaper, I'm going to brush vacuum. I'm going to grab a roll of towels and wipe. Then I'm going to reach for acetone and place it on a towel and wipe before doing the next set of sanding. Each one of these seal coats is only 1 ounce for your area, but by doing the seal coats, you're going to make your flood coat a lot easier. These seal coats are giving you time to get bubbles out, scratches, imperfections of things slightly higher in your level than others, to work that out. Everything you're doing now is going to give you a better flood coat experience. And that's what you're going to do after you do 3 applications of your seal coat. You are using the same product you used for your seal coats. It's still the same ratio. What's different is you're mixing up enough to do 3 ounces to cover your table versus the little 1 ounce applications you've done previously. The seal coat again, is similar to a quick coat, only you need to give it more time to cure. Between each of the seal coats, it rested for one night, and then I sanded, wiped it off, and recoated, let it sit for another night. This is the last coat. This is the paddle mixer that they recommended you use. Some of them are metal, and it can put gouges and eventually cut through your bucket. They really recommended you do this plastic one. They also have it for sale on their website, but I think I picked mine up on Amazon. You're going to have a lot more epoxy than you've dealt with here, but you're going to apply it the same. I recommended staying in the middle to kind of see what happens, and we pour it all out of the bucket. Instead of a squeegee, we're using that trowel. I got this trowel in the kit, and it has 1/8 by 1/8 notches out of it. So I think they refer to it as a 1/8 inch trowel. You're smearing this along, and because of the grooves, it's leaving some epoxy left behind. I did struggle getting used to using the trowel from the squeegee. I thought the squeegee was a little bit easier. I'm glad, for the sake of YouTube and yourselves, that I did not have to show you all of that video, but it does take a little while getting used to. That's why I do recommend you start in the middle. You're not worried about losing too much over edge at that point. You're just kind of getting used to flowing the epoxy and moving it. So I do recommend that. After the trowel comes the chop brush that comes in that kit. I don't know how to describe the technique I'm doing besides lightly chopping, but it's just light dabs with the brush, and you're watching the bristles spread out, and you can watch the epoxy. This is what they showed me on their video. I felt I did a really good job mimicking it. I also would recommend starting in the middle too, till you kind of get your technique figured out. You will apply this technique all around, including the edges. You definitely want to brush those edges. You want that surface tension to break so that your epoxy flows smooth over the top and bottom of your desk. And then your heat. Your heats are your last real step before letting it cure, and you're just removing any of those bubbles. Here is a close-up of those bench cookies and the attachments you can get at Rockler to help lift your piece off of them. Worked really well. Look how smooth that flood coat looks. Make sure that epoxy runs over your edges and drips down. We'll remove it later. So that's it. That's your final epoxy pour, and just let it cure. Hey everyone, just wanted to let you know that our new website went live, macelaromade.com. I share the website with my wife, who makes fun products on her lathe. You can purchase them in her store. Also, when you scroll down, you'll see more things around Carly Tackles. I have a gallery full of projects that haven't been seen on YouTube, as well as a store that I hope to release later this year where you could purchase some plans and products. Also, some fun talk around tools. When you take a deeper dive into Carly Tackles, you can see some of my work and inspiration, as well as find out ways to help support my channel. Besides watching videos on YouTube, you can support me by going to patreon.com/Carly Tackles and signing up for a membership. Also, the links in the description below to tools and products are Amazon associate links. I do get a little commission if you use those links to purchase at no extra charge to you. Thank you for your continued support, and I hope you enjoyed the next video. Thanks for watching Step 2, the epoxy pour. If you haven't already subscribed, make sure you do that and click on the notification bell so you get notified when I release Step 3, setting up these lights and assembling the frame. Thanks for watching.